The world for a 19-year-old tank loader in the summer of 1944 was a universe of steel, sweat, and the constant vibrating hum of a 400-horsepower engine. It was 5 men, crammed into a space smaller than a family car, surrounded by high-explosive shells and hundreds of gallons of high-octane gasoline. The air was thick with the smells of cordite, hot oil, and unwashed bodies. Your only view of the world outside was a sliver seen through a periscope, a jittery green-tinted landscape of Norman hedgerows that could, at any second, hide your death. The greatest fear was not the whine of an incoming mortar or the chatter of a machine gun peppering the armor. Those were known quantities. The greatest fear was a sound, a peculiar and intimate kind of sound. It wasn't a distant boom. It was a sharp, violent crack, like the universe splitting apart right beside your ear, followed an instant later by the deafening roar. It was the signature of the German 88mm anti-tank gun. The sound meant the shell had arrived before the noise of its own firing. It meant it was already through your armor. For the young loader, this sound was the last thing he ever truly registered. It was followed not by darkness, but by a flash of impossible, searing white light. The impact of the tungsten core shell was a physical blow that slammed him against the ammunition rack. In that split second, the world dissolved. The shell, having pierced the thin side armor of the M4 Sherman tank, did exactly what it was designed to do. It sent a superheated jet of molten steel and shrapnel ricocheting through the crew compartment. The loader's universe of sound and smell was replaced by a single, overwhelming sensation: heat. The stored ammunition stacked in sponsons on the sides of the tank ignited in a chain reaction. The gasoline fuel tank just behind the engine ruptured. What was a fighting vehicle a moment ago became a blast furnace. A scream was trapped in his throat, lost in the roar. His last conscious thought was a desperate, panicked fumbling for the hatch handle, a piece of steel that was now too hot to touch. Outside, the tank did not just explode, it brewed. A plume of thick, greasy black smoke erupted from the turret, followed by a tower of orange flame. For the infantrymen huddled in the ditch nearby, it was a sickeningly familiar sight. Another one gone. Another crew burned alive. This horrifying vignette was not a rare occurrence. It was the daily, brutal reality for American armored divisions fighting their way through France in the months after D-Day. The M4 Sherman, the great symbol of American industrial might, the tank that was supposed to win the war, was developing a terrifying reputation. American soldiers, with their penchant for gallows humor, had a nickname for it. They called it a Ronson, after the popular cigarette lighter of the day, whose advertising slogan was, "Lights up the first time, every time." The British had an even grimmer name for the Shermans they saw burning across the fields: Tommy Cookers. But it was the Germans, the men who faced these tanks every day, who gave it its most damning indictment. In their official reports and in the letters they sent home, German panzer crews and anti-tank gunners referred to the American M4 Sherman with a cold, professional disdain. They called it a death trap. This wasn't propaganda. It was a battlefield assessment, a conclusion reached by men who watched day after day as these American tanks charged forward, only to be turned into funeral pyres with appalling efficiency. To understand how this came to be, how the arsenal of democracy produced a machine that its own crews feared and its enemies scorned, we must go back to the suffocating landscape of Normandy in 1944. After the success of the D-Day landings, the Allied armies, particularly the Americans, found themselves bogged down in a type of terrain for which they were utterly unprepared: the Bocage. This wasn't the open country of sweeping tank battles envisioned by planners. The Bocage was a maze, a patchwork of small fields and sunken lanes hemmed in by ancient, formidable hedgerows. These were not simple bushes. They were massive earthen walls, sometimes 10 feet high and just as thick, crowned with tangled trees and thorny shrubs whose roots had been binding the soil for centuries. They were, in effect, ready-made fortifications, impervious to artillery, and nearly impossible for a tank to cross. Each field was a self-contained fortress, each lane an ambush alley. This terrain dictated the terms of every engagement, It was a defender's paradise and an attacker's nightmare. It nullified the Allies' greatest advantages. Their air superiority was limited because targets were hidden beneath the thick canopy of trees, and their numerical superiority in tanks meant little when you could only bring 1 or 2 to bear at a time down a narrow lane. For the Germans, battered and retreating on other fronts, the Bocage was a godsend. A single well-hidden anti-tank gun, a bazooka team, or most lethally a single superior German tank, could lie in wait, perfectly camouflaged behind the impenetrable green wall. They could watch the American Shermans advance, wait until they were at point-blank range, 100 yards, sometimes even less, and then open fire. The first shot was almost always a killing shot. The Sherman, forced to expose its weaker side armor as it navigated the twisting lanes, was an easy target. And once it was hit and burning, its flaming hulk would block the narrow road, preventing the tanks behind it from advancing and creating a perfect, static shooting gallery for the waiting German gunners. Into this meat grinder rolled the M4 Sherman, a tank that carried with it the full weight of American optimism and industrial confidence. The men who crewed these tanks were products of a nation that believed it could build its way to victory. They had been told they were equipped with the best weapons in the world. The Sherman was the embodiment of that belief. It was a mechanical marvel of mass production. While Germany painstakingly handcrafted a few thousand of its complex heavy tanks, America was churning out Shermans by the tens of thousands. It was mechanically reliable, easy to repair, and relatively fast. Its 75mm gun was a decent all-around weapon, effective against infantry, machine gun nests, and the older German tanks it had faced in North Africa. American war doctrine was built around this machine. It wasn't meant to fight other tanks head-to-head. That was the job of specialized tank destroyers. The Sherman was designed to be an infantry support weapon, a cavalry tank for exploitation and rapid advances. The theory was sound, logical, and developed on paper thousands of miles from the battlefront. But war is not fought on paper. In the hedgerows of Normandy, American doctrine collided with German reality. The enemy the Shermans faced here was not the one they were designed to fight. By 1944, the German army had deployed a new generation of armored fighting vehicles, tanks that were not just upgrades, but quantum leaps in technology and lethality. They were the Panther and the Tiger. To the American GIs, these were not just tanks. They were monsters, steel beasts of legend whispered about in hushed, fearful tones. The Panzer IV, the Panther, was arguably the best all-around tank of the Second World War, boasting thick, sloped frontal armor that could easily deflect a Sherman's 75mm shell, and a long, high-velocity 75mm gun of its own that could slice through a Sherman's armor from over a mile away. And then there was the Tiger. The Panzer VI was less a tank and more a mobile fortress. Its armor was so thick that Shermans would watch in horror as their shells simply bounced off its hide, leaving little more than streaks of paint. Its gun, the legendary 88mm cannon, was the bane of Allied tankers everywhere. It was a weapon of such power and accuracy that it fundamentally broke the psychology of armored warfare. A Sherman crew had to get dangerously, almost suicidally close to a Tiger or a Panther to have any chance of penetrating its side or rear armor. The German crew, by contrast, could sit back, comfortable and secure, and destroy Shermans at will, long before the Americans were even in effective range to fight back. The contest was so uneven, it bordered on the absurd. It was a battle between a blacksmith's hammer and a surgeon's scalpel, and in the claustrophobic confines of the Bocage, the scalpel was always wielded with deadly precision. This profound mismatch in technology and firepower was the source of the German crew's chilling confidence and the root of the Sherman's tragic reputation as a death trap. But to understand this mismatch, to truly grasp why the Sherman was what it was, we cannot remain in the hedgerows of Normandy. We must pull back, across the English Channel, across the vast Atlantic, and into the design bureaus and factory floors of Detroit and Lima, Ohio. The story of the Sherman is not one of a single machine, but of a philosophy of war, a philosophy forged in industrial might and logistical reality. And to understand the Tiger and the Panther, we must understand a counter-philosophy, one born of desperation, technological arrogance, and a fundamentally different set of geographical and resource constraints. Let's begin with the heart of the Sherman, its engine. The primary power plant for most M4s was not a purpose-built tank engine, it was the Wright R975 Whirlwind, a 9-cylinder air-cooled radial aircraft engine. This single choice speaks volumes about the American approach. Why an aircraft engine? Because America had them. The aviation industry was producing them by the tens of thousands. It was a known quantity, reliable, with a power-to-weight ratio that was more than adequate for a 30-ton vehicle. Later, when the Wright engines were needed for aircraft, the design was flexible enough to accommodate the brawny Ford GAA, a 500-horsepower V8 derived from a V12 project that had been deemed too heavy for an airplane. Or it could take the General Motors 6046, a bizarre but effective assembly of two diesel truck engines bolted together. The point was not perfection, it was availability and serviceability. A Sherman crew, with standard training and a set of tools, could perform most routine maintenance. They could pull the entire power pack, engine and transmission, in a field workshop in under 4 hours. The suspension, a vertical volute spring system, was external and modular. A bogie hit by a mine could be unbolted and replaced with relative ease. This was a machine designed by men who understood that a tank broken down by the side of the road is as useless as one destroyed by an 88mm shell. Reliability was its own form of armor. This design philosophy was dictated by a single, unalterable fact. Every Sherman, every bullet, every gallon of gasoline, and every can of sea rations had to cross 3,000 miles of ocean. The M4 Sherman weighed roughly 33 short tons fully loaded. This was the absolute sweet spot for mass transport. It could be loaded by the dozen onto a standard Liberty ship. It could be accommodated by most port cranes in Britain, and later in the hastily repaired harbors of France. It could cross the temporary Bailey bridges thrown up by combat engineers. Its weight exerted a ground pressure of about 14 pounds per square inch, allowing it to traverse a wide variety of terrain without bogging down. Its logistics were baked into its very steel. The American war machine was an avalanche, and the Sherman was the standardized, perfectly shaped stone that made up that avalanche. In 1944 alone, American industry produced over 2,000 Shermans per month. The total production run would approach 50,000 units. It was a flood of steel no enemy could hope to dam. Now contrast this with the German approach. The Tiger I, weighing in at a colossal 57 tons, and the Panther at 45 tons, were not designed for a global supply chain. They were designed to dominate a continental battlefield. At their core was the Maybach HL230P30, a 23-liter V12 gasoline engine. On paper, it was a masterpiece, generating close to 700 horsepower. In reality, it was a thoroughbred engine being asked to haul the weight of a draft horse. It was complex, temperamental, and chronically overstressed. In the Panther, it was adequate. In the Tiger, it was a constant source of mechanical failure, particularly the transmission, which had to translate that power into movement for a 57-ton beast. Breakdowns were not a risk, they were a statistical certainty. The very engineering that made the German tanks so formidable in combat made them a logistical nightmare. Consider the Tiger's suspension. To distribute its immense weight, it used a complex, interleaved road wheel system called a Schachterlaufwerk, 8 large overlapping wheels per side. This gave it a surprisingly smooth ride and low ground pressure for its mass. But for maintenance, it was a mechanic's hell. To replace a single damaged inner road wheel, a crew first had to remove up to 5 outer wheels. A task that could take an entire day in a well-equipped workshop could become impossible in the mud and cold of the front lines. On the Eastern Front, mud and snow would pack between the overlapping wheels and freeze solid overnight, immobilizing the tank completely until crews could thaw it out with blowtorches. The Panther shared a similar, though slightly less complex design, and suffered from the same vulnerabilities. These were not machines for a war of attrition. They were handcrafted weapons, and they demanded a level of care and feeding that a collapsing Reich could simply not provide. And this brings us to the lifeblood of any mechanized army: fuel. The American Sherman, with its radial engine, consumed about 1.5 gallons of gasoline per mile under ideal road conditions. The German Tiger, with its larger Maybach, burned through nearly 3 gallons per mile. Off-road, these numbers skyrocketed. The American logistical train, epitomized by the famed Red Ball Express, was a monumental river of supply, moving an average of 12,500 tons of material to the front lines every day. A significant portion of that tonnage was fuel, pumped from the endless oil fields of Texas and Oklahoma. The American Third Army alone could consume up to 800,000 gallons of gasoline on a single day of offensive operations. America could afford to be profligate with fuel. Germany could not. By 1944, Allied bombing campaigns had systematically targeted Germany's synthetic fuel plants and throttled its access to crucial oil fields like Ploiești in Romania. Fuel was more precious than steel. A Tiger tank's operational range was barely 60 miles on a good day. This crippling lack of fuel dictated German armored doctrine. They could no longer conduct the sweeping blitzkrieg maneuvers of 1940. Instead, they were forced into a defensive posture, using their superior tanks as mobile pillboxes in carefully prepared ambush positions. They had to wait for the battle to come to them, because they literally did not have the gas to go find it. The fearsome reputation of the Tiger and Panther was, in part, a direct consequence of their logistical weakness. They excelled in the one type of fight their supply lines forced them to wage. This disparity extended to the very men inside the machines. The American supply chain ensured that a GI in an M4 crew had a daily caloric intake of over 4,000 calories, delivered via standardized K rations and C rations. They were, by the standards of the day, exceptionally well fed. The German Lanzer of 1944 was not. As supply lines frayed and the homeland was bombed into ruin, rations were cut again and again. A cold meal of black bread and sausage was a luxury. A hungry, exhausted crew cannot maintain a complex machine like a Panther. They cannot stay alert for hours on end. The American system, in its totality, sustained not just its machines, but its men, ensuring they could keep fighting day after day. So when a German Panzer crewman looked out from his thick, sloped armor and saw a Sherman, he didn't see the thousands of other Shermans being unloaded at Cherbourg. He didn't see the Liberty ships crossing the Atlantic, the dedicated recovery vehicles, the endless supply of spare parts, the well-fed crew, or the millions of gallons of gasoline that powered it all. He saw a tall, thinly armored box with a gun that couldn't penetrate his front plate. He saw a target. And when his 88mm shell tore through its hull, causing the ammunition to ignite in a catastrophic fire, he saw confirmation of his own superiority. He saw a death trap. What he failed to see was the 4 other Shermans maneuvering on his flank, their crews coordinating by radio, backed by a storm of artillery called in by a forward observer, and a P-47 Thunderbolt circling overhead, ready to drop a 500-pound bomb on his position. The Germans built a better tank. The Americans built a better army. But an army is not just its machines. It is the men who live and die inside them. And for the German Panzer crewman of late 1944, life inside his technically superior machine had become a slow, grinding ordeal of deprivation. The war was no longer an abstract contest of empires fought on a map. It was a personal, intimate battle waged against the gnawing emptiness in his own stomach, against the bitter cold that seeped through the steel of his tank, and against the chilling silence that followed the expenditure of his last shell. Consider the world of a Panther crew in the Ardennes forest during the winter offensive. The machine itself, a marvel of engineering, becomes an iron paradox. It is their fortress and their prison. The day begins not with a bugle call, but with the agony of waking up. The cold inside the tank is a physical presence, a damp metallic chill that has settled deep into their bones overnight. Their breath hangs in the air as thick white plumes. Every surface is coated with a slick, freezing condensation. The loader, a boy of 17 drafted from the Hitler Youth just months earlier, finds his greatcoat is frozen stiff, the fabric as unyielding as plywood. He has to crack it to move his arms. His job is to wrestle 75mm shells, weighing nearly 15 pounds each, but his hands are numb, clumsy claws, the joints swollen and aching. He's been wearing the same pair of socks for 3 weeks. Food, when it comes, is an insult to their hunger. The American GI is opening a C-ration can of meat and vegetable stew, part of a logistical miracle that stretches back to factories in Ohio. The German crew divides their day's ration, a few slices of dense, sour black bread hard as a brick, a sliver of rancid sausage, its fatty taste a fleeting memory of warmth and energy, and a canteen of bitter ersatz coffee brewed from roasted acorns, which does nothing to warm them but gives their stomachs something to churn. They measure their existence in calories, and they know with a certainty that gnaws deeper than the cold that they are losing this war of attrition. The commander, a veteran of the Eastern Front, remembers the campaigns in France and Russia, when the supply trucks were laden with fresh food, chocolate and cigarettes. Now, he chews on a piece of bread, making it last, and feels the tremors in his hands. It is not fear, not yet. It is the simple physiological response of a body consuming itself to stay alive. How can a man command a complex fighting machine when his brain is fogged by malnutrition? How can a gunner lay his sight on a target 2 kilometers away when his vision blurs and a wave of dizziness washes over him? The machine itself is starving too. The driver, a mechanic from Stuttgart, performs his morning ritual with a prayer. He knows the Panther's engine is a masterpiece, but it is also a temperamental beast that demands high-octane gasoline. What he has is a low-quality substitute, thinned with whatever synthetics could be scrounged. It fouls the plugs and strains the engine. Every cough and sputter from the Maybach motor sends a jolt of anxiety through the crew. Their fuel gauge is their executioner's clock. They have enough fuel to move a few kilometers, to find a good defensive position, and to wait. They have become ambush predators not by choice or doctrine, but by necessity. The great sweeping panzer attacks of 1940 are a distant legend, a story told by old men. Their war is one of stationary defense, of conserving every last drop of fuel, hoping the enemy stumbles into their sights. And then, there is the ammunition. In the turret of the Panther, the 82 rounds of high-velocity ammunition are a treasure beyond compare. Every shell is a jewel. The gunner does not think of them as mere projectiles. He knows each one by its marking. The Panzer Grenade 3942, the armor-piercing round for enemy tanks, the Sprenggranate 42, the high-explosive shell for infantry and soft targets. The commander's orders reflect this brutal economy. Hold your fire, hold it. Wait until you can't miss. They watch a column of American trucks pass by, a tantalizing target, but they dare not expend a precious high-explosive round. They are saving their shells for the real threat, the Shermans. When one finally appears, nosing out of the tree line 1,000 meters away, there is a surge of grim professionalism. This is what they were built for. The gunner is steady now, his hunger and cold forgotten in a rush of adrenaline. He lays the crosshairs on the Sherman's tall, flat side. The commander gives the order. The Panther shudders as the 75mm cannon fires, the sound a deafening crack that fills the small compartment. Through the smoke, they see the result. A perfect hit. A blossom of orange flame, followed by a thick column of black smoke. The Sherman, the Ronson lighter, has lived up to its reputation. For a fleeting moment, there is a surge of pride, a confirmation of their own skill and their machine's power. They are the elite. They are the Panzerwaffe. But the victory is hollow. It has cost them one irreplaceable armor-piercing round. They have 81 left. The burning Sherman does not provide them with food. Its destruction does not warm their freezing limbs or fill their fuel tank, and the smoke from the kill is a beacon. Minutes later, a new sound begins, a distant, terrifying whistle that grows into a scream. Artillery. The Americans don't send one shell, they send 100. The world outside dissolves into a storm of noise and shaking earth as high-explosive rounds bracket their position. The crew huddles inside their steel shell, which now feels terrifyingly thin. They are blind, deafened, and helpless. The Panther, so lethal moments ago, is just a target, an anvil for the American hammer. If they survive the barrage, the true nature of their trap becomes clear. The destroyed Sherman was just the bait. 3 more appear on their flank, maneuvering through the trees, their movements coordinated by the radio chatter the German crew can only imagine. The German commander knows he can likely kill one more, maybe even two, before they get a shot into his thinner side armor. But what is the point? Behind those 3 Shermans are 10 more. Behind those 10 is a supply depot. Behind the depot is a port, and beyond the port an entire continent, untouched by war, churning out tanks, shells and food with an inexhaustible energy. The German panzer crew saw the M4 Sherman as a death trap because it burned so easily. But in the frozen forests of the winter of 1944, they came to understand that their own magnificent machine was a trap of a different kind. It was a tomb of hunger, a coffin of cold, an immobile prison of logistical failure. They were trapped not by the quality of the enemy's tanks, but by the quantity. They were defeated not by a better gun, but by a better system. They were the dying nerve endings of a mighty war machine that had already suffered a mortal wound, its lifeblood, fuel, ammunition, and food leaking away into the frozen ground. And as they sat in their silent, hungry fortress, listening to the approaching rumble of an army that never seemed to stop, they understood the deepest human cost of the war, that even the deadliest predator will starve to death when the forest is empty. The approaching sound was not like the sharp crack of a rifle or the angry cough of their own main gun. It was a deep-throated industrial growl, the sound of a force of nature. It was the sound of gears turning in factories a world away, of oil pumped from a peaceful earth, of a river of steel that had crossed an entire ocean to find them here, in this cold, forgotten wood. For the men inside the Panther, the final moments were not a blaze of glory. There was no grand duel of titans. It was simply the end of a calculation. Their magnificent guns swiveled, spat fire one last time, a defiant roar against the inevitable. Another Sherman shuddered, its tracks blown away, crippled but not destroyed. And then the response came. Not one shell, but 3. They struck the Panther's flank, not with the futile clang of a frontal impact, but with a series of sharp, catastrophic cracks, like a great tree being felled by lightning. Inside, the world became a white-hot scream. Steel meant to protect became shrapnel. The pride of German engineering, the apex predator of the battlefield, was torn open by the mass-produced fury of its unassuming foe. The fire that followed was swift and absolute. And then, silence. A profound quiet that settled over the clearing, broken only by the crackle of burning fuel and the whisper of the wind through the shattered pine trees. The rumble of the American advance continued, passing the 2 burning hulks as a river passes stones, its current barely disturbed. The battle had already moved on. The great machine of war had no time for memory. But the land remembers. The earth that held them does not forget. For weeks, the 2 tanks sat as silent, rusting monuments. Snow fell, covering the blackened scorch marks, softening the twisted shapes of metal. It blanketed the frozen tracks that told the story of the final desperate dance. But spring always comes. The snow melts, and the scars are revealed again. The ground, poisoned with oil and coolant and the deep, iron-rich stain of blood, was slow to heal. For years, the grass grew differently in that spot, a darker, more bitter green. The trees surrounding the clearing wore their own wounds, long, vertical gashes from shrapnel, their bark puckered and rough. They stood as silent witnesses, their rings recording not just seasons of sun and drought, but a moment of terrible fire and noise. This small, violent story, written in steel and earth, was but a single sentence in a much larger saga. The German crews had called the Sherman a Ronson, a Tommy cooker, because it lit up so easily, and they were not wrong. But they had missed the deeper truth. America had not set out to build the perfect tank. It had set out to build a tidal wave. For every Sherman lost, there were 5 more rolling off a ship in Antwerp. For every shell fired, 1,000 more were being stacked on a dock in Normandy. The war was not won by the 76mm gun, but by the shipping manifest. It was not won by Krupp steel, but by the relentless churning production lines of Detroit and the endless fields of the American heartland. It was won by the Red Ball Express, a ghostly convoy of trucks, driven by men who were often forbidden from eating in the same diners as the soldiers they supplied, yet who moved a river of fuel and ammunition that was the true lifeblood of the Allied advance. This was the great, terrible revelation of the war. It was the first true industrial conflict, where victory was a matter of logistics, of production totals, and supply chain efficiency. The Germans had created a magnificent weapon in the Panther. It was a masterpiece of engineering, a warrior's tool. But they had forgotten to build the world that could sustain it. They had crafted the perfect spear tip, but had neglected the shaft. The Americans, in contrast, understood the new reality. Their Sherman was not a masterpiece. It was a tool, simple, reliable, and above all, replaceable. It was one component in a vast interconnected system designed to bring overwhelming and unending pressure to bear. The American way of war was not a brilliant fencing match, it was an avalanche. It valued the lives of its crewmen enough to ensure that if their tank was destroyed, another would be waiting for them along with a hot meal and a letter from home. The Deathtrap, it turned out, was not the tank that burned, but the tank that starved. And so we are left with the silence of the forest, decades later. The hulks have been cleared away, melted down and reformed into things of peace. The trees have grown tall, their bark slowly swallowing the metal shards embedded within them. But the story remains held in the soil, whispered by the wind. It is a story about two kinds of strength. One is the strength of the predator, sharp, fast and deadly, but utterly dependent on the health of the forest around it. The other is the strength of the forest itself, slow, patient and inexorable, a force that cannot be defeated because it is not one thing, but everything. The German tankers, sitting in their cold steel tombs, saw the individual Sherman as a flawed and fragile thing. What they failed to see until it was too late was the forest from which it came. A forest that stretched all the way across an ocean, an invisible, unstoppable power that made their own magnificent strength, in the end, irrelevant. The true Deathtrap was not a design flaw in a tank. It was the profound illusion that a single perfect weapon could ever hope to defeat a world.